about time, so we are going to get started. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. My name is Brandyn Campbell, and I want to thank you for joining our webinar today. Today we want to talk a little bit about how we can guide you on a journey for digital transformation and process automation for everything related to accounting, from accelerating procurement processing to invoicing to compliance as a whole. We're seeing across the board, technology is widely available, and it's available to help organizations of all sizes automate their processes, but a lot of companies we're working with still aren't taking advantage of the tools available to them. And we want to talk a little bit about our journey, our best practices, and how we work with clients like you and our partners. So once again, my name is Brandyn Campbell. I'm a director on the business development team at Ephesoft, and with me I've got a great panel of experts who are here to lend some of their expertise as well.
Thank you. So my name is Scott Tripp. I am a director with Grant Thornton out of our Washington, D.C. area practice. I'll be going over the transformation journey aspects. So nice to meet you all and look forward to going through all that.
And I'm Neil. I work at Catalytic in our partnerships group, working on workflow integration and all types of different automation, which you'll get to learn more about from our colleagues here.
My name is Will Morse, and I'm an experience manager at Grant Thornton, and I am in the tech transformation practice.
Great, Scott, take it away.
Sounds good. All right. So what we'd like to do, if we move to the next slide, is kind of walk you through some of the key finance transformation objectives as you kind of look to embark upon these things. So what we wanted to start with was just really three main objectives as you go through these journeys is, making sure that you gather the insight necessary for the potential improvements on a finance function, guide the management decision around where and what improvements should be prioritized for implementation, which is key. You don't want to boil the ocean in those aspects. And then ultimately developing a plan to coordinate the various change initiatives. So making sure that there's kind of a structured approach that helps to guide on various stages. And so we'll walk you through kind of how that looks. Grant Thornton has an approach that we want to share as part of this. So we move to the next slide. What we want to really kind of go into is, as you take on these things and look at kind of digitizing and optimizing, is looking at optimizing the target operating model. And what do we mean by that is really that as an organization embarks on execution of their transformation journey to modernize their finance organizations, there should be opportunities to optimize along the way across four main dimensions. So process, people, technology, and organization. And in order to maximize the return on investments for companies, you should enable the right processes in the correct organization while also managing the people aspects and the change that comes with that. And then also ideally the technology to support those business requirements. So as you kind of go around the circle and look at it, this helps to kind of dissect the process and where to kind of integrate those solutions in for the optimization. And organizations can look at process and org and really look at kind of how do I move from a centralized or decentralized to a centralized model, or where is it, how would you build a shared service model for accounts payable, those types of things, and how would you structure the organization to support the technology to implement those. At Grant Thornton, we help to bring to the clients the best practices and the processes and organizational designs to support those executions. You look at the people process aspect of it, and you look at kind of the processes being implemented for large user groups or large amounts of change identified as you're going through this journey, as well as kind of, what is the management structure of the project to ensure that you have that structured approach to ultimately kind of gain and kind of overcome conflicted priorities. And that's where kind of a structured project management approach to help support that execution comes to play. And then on the technology front, it's really, again, what is the right technologies and functionality available to you, and kind of how do you, assess that and make informed decisions and start the execution of those phases. So if we move to the next kind of slide, if you will, what I wanted to go through with you is as you're embarking on that, the transformation methodology to employ that. So again, kind of at Grant Thornton, we look at a ability to do that assessment and really identifying where those opportunities are. And we phase it across kind of two phases. One is your current state understanding, and then the second is the opportunity assessment and roadmap. Within there are 4 kind of key steps. So the first step is really the align on project objectives and goals to identify the stakeholders. The key here is that you really want to establish a North Star for alignment on the objectives and goals. This helps chart your strategic vision of the organization to support the growth, the scalability, the objectives that your organization has, to ensure as we get kind of into these demos and Ephesoft and Catalytic as kind of how can you across the enterprise really harness these capabilities and really take the opportunity to get the full kind of depth and breadth of those solutions to help kind of realize those benefits. In addition to it, it helps to keep the organization on track on the desired outcomes, ensuring that there's skin in the game across the organization, across the various functions, by identifying the stakeholders. When you move into step 2, what we typically are going through is really assessing the current state. We're looking at kind of a set of observations around the process, understanding how does that process work today? What are some of the pain points? Is there complexity or a convoluted workflow? Is there limited automation or an approach around one size fits all on a process around, let's say, approvals? Are there erroneous activities that are onus activities that basically cause additional work, such as double entry, things of data extraction, things of that nature, and kind of the list goes on. But ultimately, really kind of scaling and rating and looking at the current state capabilities in a kind of independent fashion. Then as you move into step 3, you're really looking at assessing that current state and seeing kind of where are there gaps to where the desired future state resides. And we're looking, if we think back to what we were covering before, kind of those dimensions, the aspects around organization, people, process, technology, kind of where are the capabilities within those functions across those dimensions to help identify that. And then what happens is you formulate, and we help to formulate at Grant Thornton opinions and recommendations around what opportunities and what are the associated projects and kind of business case for that change. And that really helps to drive some insights from the business around kind of educating what opportunities to pursue and what makes sense. And then ultimately on step 4, you're looking to really kind of look at, the roadmap and outlining what initiatives go together based on a prioritized list of objectives. So, you've gone through the projects, you've prioritized them based on the business case in alignment to the strategy that was performed up front, and then kind of looking at how do those lace together in terms of dependencies, sequence of events, making sure that you don't get transformation fatigue, which is a big deal on these types of aspects, and really kind of ultimately building that roadmap for a sequence of events to get to the realization of the automation of processes and employment of technology that allows you to kind of take advantage across the full organization and realize the most kind of efficiencies and cost effectiveness that you can. So at Grant Thornton, we always advocate process first approach to deliver efficiency and effectiveness. That gives you the greatest outcome and kind of meets your needs the most. And as we're going through this, it's really around developing kind of an understanding what are the true root causes to really get the increased value for more quick realization of the investment profile. So if you understand the root cause and can rectify that, you aren't perpetuating a bad process or designing and baking in a bad process that might be a hindrance down the road. And ultimately, by kind of taking this methodology, you get to a quick improvement realization because you stagger kind of what are the dependencies that you're not waiting on, particular other aspects to start to realize those initiatives coming to fruition. And that's kind of where you see towards the far right, there's a phase 3 design and deployment aspect, which really gets into kind of the enacting of those recommendations. We move to the next slide. What we wanted to kind of talk about, and we'll go through these obviously in more detail with the demo coming up as well, but typical challenges that we see within procure-to-pay across the organizations. And we've worked with multiple clients, and we see heavy manual transaction processing. There's lengthy approval chains. There's disparate technologies with limited integration, limited levels of standardization, which again go back to kind of integration aspects that might be the genesis of that, as well as, you know, the fact that there is kind of lengthy approval processes. So there may be a dichotomy on how that approval happens, which then varies on the standardization. There's poor communication at times between cross functions. And so what we look to do is, you know, look at kind of 3 tenets as you're going through that transformation journey: simplify, standardize, and automate. And ultimately, by going through and following those tenets, what you'll see is that you can get an enhanced automation process through these technologies. You can migrate from heavy transaction to an analytic-based management to monitor and improve the process. You can focus on the analytics. What are the value add activities versus kind of the entry of things? You can simplify the authority schedule through kind of various thresholds and data aspects to help to automate and kind of generate kind of answers that will allow for appropriate workflows versus following one size fits all. And then ultimately that also enhances the communication, because there's a kind of a workflow or an automation that occurs that helps to kind of feed or share that information across. But again, kind of we'll touch upon these through the demo and other aspects that we'll go through. And coming up shortly, Will is going to conduct a demo that highlights how these kind of recommendations that come out of a finance transformation like we were going through and that methodology can ultimately be obtained from the transformation and enacted using kind of Ephesoft and Catalytic capabilities, and see kind of how workflow, data and analytics, and the automation aspects come in to drive some of those things around, you know, not having double entry, improving the communications, also kind of ensuring that you maybe don't overextend a credit limit to a customer because of double invoicing, things of that nature. So with that, what I want to do is hand it off to Brandyn to go through some aspects as well.
Thanks, Scott. So something that's really important and is often overlooked in terms of the entire process where digital transformation is involved is how you're actually dealing with content capture, both old archival documents as well as day-forward content. We know that unstructured document data represents up to 80% of all of the available data in an organization. And we all know how crucial data is for anything having to do with automation or analytics and digital transformation in general. And as an industry kind of understanding that same percentage, that 80% number, it represents the number of workflows across your organization that typically touch or incorporate documents as a key aspect of the process. So this really means that any transformation journey must take into account how a company or a specific department is going to deal with both those archival documents, like I mentioned, your records, as well as the new day forward content that you deal with regularly. And when we look at procurement specifically, when we're looking at accounting and compliance, the financial documents like invoices and purchase orders and terms and conditions documents, they're a really great starting point for a digital transformation initiative. So with an intelligent document capture tool that supports automated document identification and data extraction, such as the capture platform provided by Ephesoft by my company, companies see a reduction in manual document processing and data entry time, just that first starting point of the digital transformation journey, from 50 to 80% of a time reduction. And that's absolutely massive. Now, specific to the world of accounting, this means processing invoices, processing POs in a manner that does not require the manual entry of line items or vendor information into multiple ERP systems, into the general ledger, into other accounting applications. And what Will is going to show here shortly in his demonstration is just how we can automate that so you don't have highly paid, highly skilled workers performing manual data entry tasks on an iterative basis. And what's more is that with a machine learning powered document capture tool, again, like the one we're going to be demonstrating soon here, the implementation timeframe for starting to process documents is virtually negligible. So this means a quicker time to start on an automated overhaul for the accounting department. This means not having to grab a template or a sample invoice of every single vendor your company works with in order to get highly accurate results for data extraction and for processing. Now, one customer I'd like to call out as just a little use case example here is HANA Logistics. And for HANA Logistics, working with our capture platform to support automated invoice processing, it meant turning their AP department from a cost center to a profit center. So they actually had to update the company general ledger in order to add a new column for the accounting team's profits, which is just absolutely massive when we start getting into the conversation about ROI. So with just 2 headcount, 2 full-time employees, their accounting team processed more than 135,000 invoices annually. That number is a little bit closer to 150 now. And their relationships with their vendors have improved dramatically as a result of the increased payment timeframes and visibility. And basically, they were able to take advantage of early payment discounts and credits in order to generate that profit, and then to be able to reinvest in new technology for their specific department as well as the organization as a whole. And then another big thing we saw is that they decreased their aging process from 90 days to 2 days on invoices. And for anyone in an accounting department and procurement in general, that's huge. And we're really excited to be able to duplicate these efforts for organizations of all sizes. Neil?
Great. So I think the recurring theme here is there's a fair bit of flexibility and versatility in most of these types of solutions, and also a fair bit of variability in the ways that different companies will apply these. So as we think through things like procurement and supply chain and accounting and just these different elements of businesses, that'd be helpful to run through 2 examples through a slightly different lens. So if we think about document capture as sort of the first half of the equation, the other piece for most practical business solutions inside of enterprises is that you're not going to have a problem that fits neatly in a fully structured form. It's unrealistic to think that most of your end-to-end processes work that way. And so one of the cases that came up was with Bosch, where they had to go and look through 70,000 contracts every time there would be a need to do an audit or pull specific terms out. And so the first half of the equation was in extracting the information, getting it into a structured form, having all the key terms out and ready. But then there was a whole series of things that had to happen around how you handle exceptions, how you learn from them over time, and how you ultimately make updates in the system of record. In this case, it was SAP. And so since there's an orchestration effort between different people, different document sources, different enterprise systems, there's actually a fair bit of manual effort that happens end to end overall. And by pulling that type of a process into an orchestration engine with technology in front of it and behind it, you can get a lot of benefit out of it. In the second case that we have, we were working with a customer that was dealing with month-end close. And this is kind of an example which flies counter to the conventional wisdom of task automation as being the end-all be-all. The actual manual effort, time savings is relatively low, right? It's a couple of days of work out of a month, which is still useful and great to return back to the business. But the key here is that the manual risk of error has gone down drastically. The amount of visibility, the reliability has increased significantly, and the overall experience has gotten a lot better. And the way that that was achieved was by taking those different types of exceptions, those different types of issues, and making it so that there was a structured way to follow up and chase on each of those open items for resolution. And so you have in there the ability for someone to know exactly where something is in a process, know exactly what's outstanding, and then be able to take action on that. So going back to kind of the earlier themes here brought up throughout the story, thinking about the process, designing it in a smart way end to end, and having visibility throughout is the key to having operations be as strong as possible. So with that, I think it'd be useful to hand it over for official live demonstration here.
All right, thanks, Neil. Thanks, Brandon. So again, for today's demo, we're going to go and cover Ephesoft Semantic, as well as the integration specific with Catalytic. So in terms of the demonstration workflow, you're going to see some invoices that are received. Now, this is going to come through email, email importing. So say a vendor was to submit an invoice to you as a PDF. It's going to go through an automated invoice data extraction through Ephesoft Semantic. And then it's going to also kick over to Catalytic for the workflow engine and do a lot of the duplication or duplicate checking, go out for the particular approvals. So it's going to go and look for dollar thresholds, either if it's a first approver or a second approver. And then we're also going to go and talk through and showcase a invoice that could potentially be rejected along those exceptions managed. Followed by entry into an ERP system. In this case, we're going to demonstrate or show like integration with like an Oracle or an SAP type ERP. And then finally, we're going to send off and show a notification email that basically just says to the accounts payable department that, you know, the invoice has been finally approved and it's awaiting for the payment to be processed, and go from there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and switch on over to Semantic. And as you can see, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to log in real quick.
Well, Lil is logging in here. A good thing to note is Semantic and Catalytic are both cloud-based applications, so accessible securely. In Semantic's case, it's hosted in AWS, and so you access it through this thin client here.
All right, thanks, Brandon. So now I've logged into Semantic, and one of the things that I kind of want to highlight is the clean layout and design of Semantic itself. So up at the very top, you have a dashboard view and a review pane, and as well as the settings. And then quickly in the dashboard view, you have all of the invoices that are there. So right now I have about 24 invoices that are there. 0 have been automatically processed. So when we talk about the machine learning aspect of things and the complete automation of the process, Semantic has the ability to process invoices all the way through from ingestion all the way to Catalytic or the integration to the workflow engine without some type of manual intervention. For purposes of this demo, I've kind of scaled that back a little bit so that way we can at least showcase the features of Semantic. And then at the same time, I have around 24 manually processed invoices, and I've completed about 21, and 3 are in progress. So down here at the very bottom, I have kind of like a little data table layout where I can view all invoices that are in the system. And as you can see, it kind of goes on this little effect where green is completed, or you know, blue is in progress, or yellow is kind of like analyzing, which means a new invoice has been submitted and it's going through the process model. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and claim an invoice and kick on over to the review side of things. And so as we kind of pull up the invoice, as you can kind of see over here to the left-hand side, going from left to right, I do have a quick little thumbnail of the actual invoice. So I can click and I can, you know, click through the various invoices that I have, that I've claimed. Over here in the middle of the screen, I have a quick thumbnail or a copy of the actual invoice. And then over to the far right, I have all of the extraction fields that I'm specifically looking for. So in this case, the legal entity, or, you know, if I'm doing some type of direct database lookups into the vendor master file, I could pull over customer ID. And in this case, it didn't find a customer ID, invoice number, purchase order number. And as you can see, as I'm clicking through this, it has the intelligence based on the model that Semantic's been trained on to be able to go in and pull out these key extraction fields. And then so likewise, total amount, it can extract the tax amount, the tax ID, and then the subtotal as well. And then the overall amount due, I'll just go ahead and type in 2427.60 cents. And it has the ability to be able to do line item extraction, but for the purposes of the demo, I didn't configure it to do the line item extraction of the invoice. But that's just one important highlight to note, that Semantic does have the ability to be configured to do line item extraction. And all of these fields that you're seeing over here, like ship freight, tax rate, terms, things like that, these are all configurable items to be able to be tailored to your organization's process. So for this, without anything, I'm going to go ahead and hit complete review. And it's going to ask me to do it twice because it's going to first validate the amount due that I typed in a correct number. So I'll hit complete review again. And I'll go ahead and I'll process another one. So in this case, you can see how because this is a kind of like a graphic image, it still pulled over the words that it could, but I'll go ahead and just type in Groves Industrial. And, I'll just go ahead and quickly click through all of this. Now, in this case, it did find the subtotal. It did find the tax amount, the state tax amount, and it did find the total amount. So I'll just go ahead and complete review. And with that, I will go ahead and switch on over to Catalytic. So now in Catalytic, one of the big things that the integration between Ephesoft Semantic and Catalytic, it's using a direct webhook. So Semantic has the ability to integrate via API and webhook into multiple applications throughout the enterprise, whether that's on-premise, Office 365, any various applications, ERPs, enterprise content management systems, and so on. And so with that, one of the first things that what I want to showcase is I'm going to go ahead and open the builder. And I'm going to kind of walk through on the Catalytic side how exactly we built this in order to be tailored to the specific use case that we're kind of covering. So as you can see, I have my triggers and fields. These triggers and fields are coming directly over from Ephesoft Semantic. I'm then calling a PDF, and this is allowing me to be able to embed the PDF as well as like the unique URL to the actual invoice. I've constructed a unique ID for that invoice to be able to then move in to the duplicate invoice checking process. So kind of if we think back around the use case that we were talking to, being able to check to make sure that we're not accidentally processing a duplicate invoice. So some of our clients in the past have received invoices via EDI, but yet their vendor still submits a paper-based invoice via email. Well, that causes a unique challenge in the sense that sometimes the accounts payable team doesn't have insights into those invoices that are being processed via EDI. And so they naturally just continue to process invoices because that's what they're used to. So likewise, it's doing a duplicate invoice check just to ensure we're not extending credits. If there is a duplicate invoice, we've configured Catalytic to be able to send out a duplicate invoice alert notifying the accounts payable team that a duplicate invoice has been found. And then it's just going to go on and go through the typical process. So for example, depending on the dollar threshold, it's going to go and do a lookup for if it's a first approver or a second approver in the approval matrix. And then it's going to be able to do the unique routings depending on, in some organizations, certain invoices go to particular individuals for approvals. It's going to go and look up in the approval matrix to ensure that the invoice is being routed correctly. Followed by email notifications for the first approver, and as well as the second approver. And then we've also built in the logic and the specific routing functions and flows to be able to handle the rejection side of things. So in this case, one of the processes that I'll kind of walk through is we'll go through a complete invoice from start to finish. We'll go through another invoice where we kind of do the rejection loop as well. And then I'll also show the duplicate invoice check. And finally, with that, doing the API call into a specific ERP, such as like Oracle, SAP, Workday, NetSuite. That's the beauty about both of these applications, is that they're both versatile in the sense of their integration capabilities, being able to integrate into multiple types of other enterprise-wide applications to be able to manage the applications landscape for the organization. And then finally, going into the accounts payable payment notification, just simply letting the accounts payable team know that the invoice has been approved and it's ready for some type of follow-on action to be able to process the check. So with that, I'll go ahead and go back to the workflow. And as you can see here, as this is loading, you can see that the invoices that have come over from Ephesoft Semantic have now populated my, my dashboard. One of the things that I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to go ahead and pull up the first email notification that I received. And with that, this is the first email notification that I received. So an action required, invoice needs processing. So as we kind of tie back into the process orchestration or builder, I have an actual copy of the invoice as an attachment. The notification, again, it can be uniquely configured, and in this case, it's just simple. So I have vendor, sign, invoice number, invoice date, the cost, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to process this invoice. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And what it's going to do is it's going to auto push me into the application to be able to do some type of form coding or whatever the process is. So while we're waiting for the application to load the dashboard, so in this case, in the first step, the accounts payable team usually performs some type of form coding, whether that's calling out what type of invoice it is. And in this case, just for the purposes of the demo, we have some, just random technical equipment. I'll do all this invoice is going to get coded to, say, GL code 52. And then maybe in some organizations, we have a list that we're managing of high priority invoices. So for example, I have a vendor that says if you pay within net 15, although our terms are net 30, but if we pay in net 15, I'm going to cut you a 10 or a 20% discount. This is where a lot of the organizations see a lot of their benefits in order to be able to save a lot of money. And so in this case, I've kind of just marked it as like a high priority. So I'll click yes, and I'll go ahead and hit submit. Once I've hit submit, if we think back to the way the workflow application was configured, it's going to go ahead and perform the next lookup. And that's going to be going through the approval matrix, looking for the first approver based on the type of invoice and or the dollar amount. And then it's going to go ahead and send out another notification. So here we are. So the application actually moves pretty quickly in terms of being able to do the lookups, even though the workflow is pretty complex. That's the agility and the speed of Catalytic, being able to get these processed pretty quickly, depending no matter what the complexity is. And so again, I'm for the purposes of the demo, I'm the first approver as well. I have the attachment of the actual invoice. If I want to view the invoice, I have it here quickly as the vendor, the invoice type, the cost, and then if it's asking for my approval or rejection. So again, I'll hit get started, and it's going to be loading my my approval box and everything. And so with that, kind of while we're waiting for it to kick on, I've already received notifications around other types of invoices that we've already processed over from Semantic, and I'll highlight what the duplicate invoice looks like. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and do a simple approval on this one. And then if I have the ability, or if I want the ability, I can configure this to, say whatever, and I'll just say test for my additional comments, and then I'll hit submit. Now, based on this dollar threshold, I'll be receiving another email alert signifying that it's another approval is required. And so if I refresh my workflow, you'll actually see from this perspective as they kind of advance on and through the process. So I've already received the other email. Let me pull it up. And again, I have the same thing. So with this, this is actually one where I guess the way I have it configured is it actually fell underneath the threshold. As I look back at my data table, the approval matrix is actually set to $2,500, and this was under that threshold. So this is a first approver scenario. But this is the actual email showing that the invoice has been approved to the accounts payable staff, asking for them to go and finalize the payment. So kind of with that, I'll move on to another approval. This is another invoice that came through. This one is the same thing, a Groves. And I'm going to go ahead and this invoice, I'll go ahead and walk through the rejection process. So the first one that we just went through was a complete end-to-end happy path, best case scenario. And in this case, I'll just code it to GL code 25. I'll say it's not a priority. I'll hit submit. And as we're kind of going through there, and as we're kind of waiting for the email to come through for the approval, I've seen other emails come through specifically to the duplicate invoice checking. So while we're going through and we're waiting for that second email to come through for the first approver, all of these things are configurable with the simple approval matrices and table builders within Catalytic. One thing I do kind of want to highlight is, although my background is in technology and I have a very strong background in data analytics and data visualizations, I had never interacted with Catalytic before. This was actually in preparation for this demo. It was kind of a quick learning process. And that's one of the things I kind of wanted to highlight around this is that Catalytic was very easy to configure with the amount of help articles, with the amount of support and knowledge that Neil and his team were able to provide me, especially with not being able to have any type of formal training. To be able to go through this and build out these workflows. It was very easy, very intuitive, and in a manner of if you could write Excel formulas and if logics and VLOOKUPs in Excel, Catalytic has the ability to, it's similar to that process. And so I was able to build this workflow out in about 2 days, just based on help articles and no formal training. So I'll go ahead. Oh, sorry, Neil.
I was going to say one of the other things from the other side too is it's always very easy, you know, just in terms of building things in the platform, that's always easy as long as you have the process in your mind. I think what makes folks like Will super effective on platforms like this is that they know how these processes ought to work, should work, can work, and how to make them really, really strong. And so that's where I think the process knowledge, domain expertise, you know, skills of the people who are actually building really shines. So I think we've tried to take, you know, whatever friction we can out of the build process, but I think a lot of the knowledge on how to do that correctly comes from people just working in the field and understanding, you know, what it takes to run these processes effectively.
Awesome, thanks. And so we've received the email. I'm going to go ahead and for this one, we'll do a simple rejection process because I do kind of want to highlight the duplicate invoice check that we have. So for here, I'm just going to say disapproved, and it's going to require me to do a comment, and I'll just say wrong GL code, and I'll hit submit. And now if we think back to the process and how this is going to loop back, is it's going to actually loop back to the accounts payable form coding team in order to be able to do some type of action with it.
This is Brandyn with Ephesoft again. Something that we see as well as refreshing here is just the ability to perform that exception handling. It's something we get requests for quite often when we're dealing with the actual data capture aspects of like an accounting or an AP automation workflow. And the great thing about a tool like Catalytic is that they're handling these exceptions natively. So there isn't additional script that has to be written in one application and translated somewhere else. It's just so highly scalable because everything is already integrated and you have the raw data that you're working with to determine whether or not that, you know, exception needs to be made, whether it's a manual rejection by an employee or whether it just surpasses a certain threshold and then goes down a different path in that workflow tree.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandyn. And so, you know, I mean, I did get the rejection email and it basically just states, you know, wrong GL code. So now it's gone back to the accounts payable form coding team member. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and just approve it, kick it on, and we'll just move on from there. So here I'll change it and we'll just say 46 and I'll hit submit. And so the last scenario that I do kind of want to cover is the duplicate invoice email notification. So as you kind of see here, this is where, you know, an invoice was submitted. And so if we think back to the scenario where some of our clients get those EDI transactions and they still get manual invoices submitted to the accounts payable team, this is the one portion of it where it did the duplicate invoice check. So it went back and it looked back at the particular table. It said, hey, I have a unique situation where the invoice number, the vendor name, and the amount all match. And so in that case, it sent out a duplication email. It's got the attachment of the invoice right here, and it's requiring me to do some type of action. And so typically what we see when we start building out these workflows as part of a team is, you know, understanding the process on how organizations handle these duplicate invoice processes. And so in this case, some of our clients will kick those duplicate invoices down a separate workflow with separate notifications that are needing to go out in terms of, you know, requiring research or reaching out to a vendor for some type of vendor resolution or some type of further insights. Or it could just be a simple miskey on the part of that. And so from here, for the purposes of this, I just simply said, is the duplicate cleared? I'll say yes. Cleared comment, you know, EDI, you know, rejected or something, you know what I mean? And then I'll just go ahead and hit submit. And then once I hit submit, it's going to go ahead and kick it off the normal approval workflow that we have. Now, if I was to say no, this is the scenario where, you know, the Grant Thornton team kind of understands the process in terms of how does a invoice that is not, that's not going to go down the approval workflow, where does that particularly go? And so with that, that kind of wraps up the demo side of things. But one of the things that I do kind of want to highlight specific to this is when you process all of this data is now residing somewhere within your organization. You may have some type of you know, analytics platform, Power BI reporting, Alteryx, or Domo, or any of those other types of data visualization tools that are out on the market that are allowing you to have better insights into your data. Some of the areas in which our clients have asked us specifically is, now that we've captured all of this data through Ephesoft Semantic, being able to digitize and extract all of those key fields, being able to then automate and drive the efficiencies through an automated workflow, but then, and then sending that over to the specific like ERP, such as like Oracle or SAP, NetSuite, Workday, Great Plains. We then go in and then take that one step further, and then we can build out Power BI or analytics dashboards that allow them to be able to then, one, be able to call the specific invoice up outside of like whatever visualization tool, because we have the unique URL of the invoice, be able to look at vendor spend, being able to look at how much my vendor, how much I have spent with this particular vendor on a monthly, quarterly, or a yearly basis. So being able to provide those data insights that, you know, typical organizations may not have that ability to, that's just one other area where our clients have asked us to extend the platform now that they've been able to get all of this data in a digitized state. So kind of with that, that kind of wraps up the demo. I'll kind of turn it back over to Scott so we can kind of go through the last remaining portions of the webinar. Scott?
Appreciate it. Well, so let's bring back up the slide deck. And we're going to go kind of to wrap up from the demo. If we go to the next slide, we just want to hit upon a few tips and tricks or success factors, if you will. We kind of layered in a few quotes just towards the end to cap it out. But for starters, as we talked about before in the beginning, is, you know, within that transformation journey and following a methodology, there's really, it's a critical success factor to do the visioning and get alignment at the executive level and throughout the organization for what the enterprise-wide kind of solution or vision is. So ensuring that kind of not only are you all kind of beating to the same drum, marching to the same endpoint, but that, you know, you guys are in alignment on what does that end state look like, in order to be able to best harness the solutions as they come forward. Because the worst case scenario is that you don't want to kind of optimize a suboptimal process, or the flip is you don't want to kind of cut yourselves short from the realization of the full potential and kind of improvement and optimization that can occur because it's been restricted to a particular silo within the organization. And to kind of hit upon that is the Bill Gates quote around the first rule of any technology used in a business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. The second is that the automation applied to inefficient operations will magnify the inefficiency. And so that's why at Grant Thornton, we really hit upon, you know, following a transformation methodology, looking at it from end to end, and really bring kind of people in to help independently look at it, find out where it stacks capabilities wise to peers. And so that way you can best gauge improvement areas. With that, I think, Neil, if you want to hit upon some change management aspects, that would probably be good as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think change management is often talked about in the context of, okay, we had a process that we were doing yesterday and now we have a new process to do tomorrow. But there's also the element of skills around, I had a team of people that were doing X or Y job yesterday. What is it that they can do today? How can I take the knowledge that they currently have and turn that into something that I'm going to need in the future, right? How do I take deep knowledge of an end-to-end process and turn that into the ability to produce more automated solutions, things like that? I would imagine that some of that also has to do with taking a look at, you know, the technologies that they have and making heads or tails of those. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, and thank you, Neil. And so to that effect, you know, making heads and tails of it, it's really making sure you understand the landscape of the technologies that exist today. Are they truly being optimized, or are they suboptimally utilized at the moment? And so that's where kind of as we went through the demo, you see the benefits of integration and not having to do kind of swivel chair activities, things of that nature, but really kind of getting the data to flow through so that the high level of automation, people can then focus upon value add activities around the assessment of data through analytics reports as well as hit upon. So those are the key pieces around kind of making sure you're looking fully across the ecosystem, process, people, tech, organization, for those improvement aspects. And so, you know, application consolidation to reduce your capital expenditures key, as we have up here. So once you get that kind of sense of what the landscape looks like, you can determine, are there redundancies in the systems you have? Are things being suboptimally integrated? Are there things that need to be swapped out for modernization? Today, we hear a lot around kind of the modernization of the systems within finance, because there's a big pull around how do we kind of take advantage of the most innovative solutions that are out there today that are really going to kind of excel the business forward. And then ultimately, you know, the last one here is really around shared services for maximized return on investment. So it goes kind of hits upon, you know, consolidation or centralization, if you will, of processes to truly get kind of the most optimal footprint where you're doing things most efficiently. There's an effective manner in which things are getting executed because it's a standardized process. There's more minimized exceptions or errors because it's fairly prescriptive, and you can look at more of the value add activities. And I think, Brandon, if there's anything you want to hit upon kind of within the last pieces.
Yeah, definitely. Something that I think about a lot, and it actually just called to mind when Will was talking about the invoice duplication actions within Catalytic and identifying whether or not there's been an invoice already submitted on a different platform or something along those lines, or for reasons of correction. Being able to quickly identify and correct that before an employee takes action on that invoice and does that duplicate work is huge. And I think about use cases like in human resources, for example. How can we take that workflow that's already been, you know, kind of built out and developed and created using the data that was extracted from content, the workflow processes for checking against that database or checking against those multiple systems, and replicate that in human resources, for example. So let's say you work in a highly secure environment, you have to do background investigations, you have people that are applying maybe once a year for a new application or for an updated application. How do you vet out applications that have been submitted in duplicate on accident, or people that are submitting applications nefariously multiple times without having to get into all of the work to go back and find out whether or not they've submitted an application previously? So what I really think is, when I think of shared services as it relates to intelligent automation and intelligent capture and the entire digital transformation journey, is once you've made that investment for your accounts payable team, for procurement as a whole, how can you take advantage of that same technology and apply it to other areas of your business? Because that's where your ROI, I think, is going to absolutely soar. And I think that that's where, for me personally, the customers that I work with, the people we've seen at Ephesoft have the greatest success when they take what they've implemented for one department and they make it available to other departments as well.
Just, I guess, one last thing to kind of expand upon and what we've seen is lately, given the current environment and everything going on, there's been a high kind of focus around the insights that you can have in terms of visibility of the process. So from an accounts payable standpoint, being one of the many legs or three legs, if you will, of a working capital or liquidity view, I was working with a client that wants to have this view of what's coming down the pike, because they need to make decisions and be able to know what levers they can pull in terms of, are we maximizing the amount of discounts we have, or, are we getting close to a covenant breach that we need to kind of effectively maybe forego a discount or something of that nature to hold back to ensure that we don't breach those covenants because of the operating cycle that's going on in the environment, and we've seen some kind of delays. So solutions like this, where you really get the integration of that process and all the data kind of flowing through to be able to see visibility of what's going on and make insightful decisions, is really also something that effectively really gives you a return on your investment, but it's more kind of from the operational standpoint that is the brass tacks piece. So I do want to hit upon kind of those things, because we've seen a lot of that in a current kind of macroeconomic standpoint of what's going on, and people wanting to be able to have more control over kind of the AP and AR aspects that kind of play into liquidity.
Thanks, Scott. And I think, oh, sorry, I was going to say, I think we have time for maybe like 2 questions that I've got here that the chat asked, if we're okay for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So first one is a question: is there anything you'd recommend clients do before reaching out about a procurement project? Any specific information they need to gather?
Yeah, I can start to field that, and then Neil and Will and Brandon, if you guys want to follow suit as well. But one of the key aspects is, as you're undertaking this, most of the time, what we find beneficial is, if you're collecting the existing documentation, your policies, what operational metrics might there be in terms of kind of volume of invoices going through, the number of FTEs supporting that group, like that information, on top of kind of the existing documentation, helps to really solidify the understanding of the current state, as well as to truly accelerate some of the learnings into kind of where can you pivot to optimize the process, and also effectively how that needs to get designed and tailored to the client's needs and to the solutions around, Ephesoft and Catalytic that would come to bear. Brandon or Neil or others, if you guys want to add to that, you're welcome to.
Yeah, specifically as it relates to like the capture piece and working with the actual documents, I think you hit on it already, better understanding where you get content from. Are you getting things emailed to you? Are they being submitted at a portal? Or is it a fax server? Making sure you've identified all the areas so that you're capturing all of the necessary information and there aren't outliers. And then just understanding basic flow of who usually touches what when they work with the documents. And I know a lot of that is kind of discovered during the initial discovery phase and some of the consulting phases, but those are the big things I would say. All right, I've got another question here, if that's right. I think we've got time for probably just one more here. So I've got, can these workflows be modified or altered to fit our specific needs? And would work have to be done by your technical or professional services team, or could my IT department make the changes themselves?
So yeah, Brandon, I can take that one. So from the workflow perspective, being able to build out, do the initial configuration, get everything quickly stood up to maximum value from a time delivery standpoint, we would definitely be able to set this up in a manner to scale. From that standpoint, once we've completed the initial implementation, part of what my team has done in the past and how we've kind of helped assisted clients is I actually have an accounts payable manager that we actually did an implementation for, and trained her in order to be able to make these modifications to both Ephesoft as well as like the workflow engine, given how intuitive both of those applications are and just the ease of use. So you don't necessarily need to have a robust IT staff in order to be able to manage these applications and or make the modifications needed. So I think it kind of speaks very well to how both of these applications are built in terms of the technology stack that they're on, because the accounts payable manager, although she knows that we're there as kind of like a 911, she is usually the one that kind of takes it upon herself to make these modifications as their internal processes changes. And if they have any questions, they usually will typically reach out just from like a best practices standpoint. Scott, Neil, Brandon, anything else?
Yeah, this is Scott. I'd say that there's also a growing kind of desire, and it's recommended as well, that, where there's ability to kind of take some of the functionality of systems into the actual functions themselves and get a little bit more kind of arms around or interaction with the system for the business to ultimately make certain adjustments for functionality they need is been kind of a growing trend and desire, and really getting to a point where you have an application like we've shown here that is easily used and interacted with by the users for quick design and adjustments based on changes or pivots in the way the business process works. So, if you want to change the approval or workflow process, you don't want to have to work on a remedy ticket with IT, but be able to do it in-house with the functions to design it the way they need as quickly and rapidly as they need.
And I think we are just about at time. Really appreciate the time. It looks like we do have a couple more questions, some about integration with different systems. So if you've asked a question we weren't able to get to it, we'll definitely follow up after the fact by email to address that. Thank you all so much for joining, and please feel free to connect with us. Shoot us an email if you'd like some more information. Oh, actually, Neil, if you want to tackle that one, please go ahead.
Oh, I'll type the answer, but the question was around, in order to integrate with an ERP, is there any technical resource? And usually it's just the one who's providing any access to the underlying system. So testing accounts or credentials or things like that, but otherwise, no. Thanks.
Thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon.